So today we'll be getting into notes number 4, 5? I can't remember. Let me see. Notes number 5. Okay, notes number 5. We'll be doing these in 2 parts. That's why it says part 1 on top, and then tomorrow we'll be doing part 2. Today is just kind of a brief overview of how plants are classified. Before you get any further with the video, please make sure you have either the printed off notes or you have notebook paper and a pen or pencil nearby ready to go. And as always, I'll show you how to do that as we go on. If you're doing the handwritten notes, make sure you have your name at the top. And then you want to have notes number 5 up here in the top corner. Yikes, something got frozen here. Anyway, and then your title will be plant classification. Make sure you have your divider line. Let's try that again. Make sure you have your divider line. That's so much better. With your subject on the left and details on the right. So first, as a general review, the father of classification that we mentioned way back in October was Carolus Linnaeus. He was the first to develop that system of classifying all living things. It had 7 levels of classification when he created it, but since then, scientists have added one more, which gives us this. Gives us domain at the top, so we would kind of include that up here. Domain, and then kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Hopefully you remember that. Remember we said it was Dear King Philip came over for great spaghetti. We mentioned then that this is kind of the levels of classification, and we will get into how plants fit into all of these, or some of these, not all of them, but we'll get into that a little more tomorrow. However, for today, that's just the brief general review. We'll use it more tomorrow. So we said that Carl Linnaeus is the father of classification. His system contained 7 levels, but we've added one more since then. And then go ahead and list out the 7 or the 8 domains here. If you have the printed off notes, you have a spot for that as well. So make sure you fill those in. Again, it's domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Okay, so if you can recall, back when we talked about classification, there were 3 domains, one of which had membrane-bound organelles and a nucleus. The other 2 did not. So the first one that we mentioned was eukaryote, and this is the one that has a membrane-bound nucleus. Okay, it has a defined nucleus. And then archaea and bacteria are the other 2. They are what we called prokaryotic, where their DNA is just kind of a mess all inside of the cell here. So plants are part of domain eukaryote, meaning they're this kind. They do have a nucleus, they do have membrane-bound organelles. All organisms in this domain, domain eukaryote, have more complex cells with enclosed organelles and a double membrane surrounding the nucleus. Okay, not just one, but 2. So going a little bit further, we talked about the 4 different kingdoms of domain. Let me just kind of, domain of eukaryote. Let me just kind of see if I can note them up here. Okay, so we had domain eukaryote, meaning it has a nucleus inside of the cell. Okay, then we said there were 4 kingdoms that go into domain eukaryote. In October, we spent a pretty good amount of time talking about kingdom Animalia. And then when we went a little bit further, we talked about vertebrates and invertebrates, and etc. But real quickly, I want to go over the other 3 kingdoms because that's what we're going to talk about today. So we had Animalia, which was part of eukaryote. Then we have the plant kingdom, or kingdom Plantae. Then we had the fungi kingdom and Protista. Okay, so for plants, obviously, these are going to be involved in the plant kingdom. So, characteristics of all organisms in the plant kingdom, they are multicellular, meaning this prefix multi, again, meaning that they are made of more than one, and each cell works together to do one job, and then all of those kind of tissues and organs work together to keep the entire organism alive. So that's one characteristic. They're all multicellular. They also get their energy by making their own food. We mentioned that a couple days ago about photosynthesis and how that kind of plays a role in all of this. The other term for making their own food is autotrophic. Okay, talked about that quite a few times. The opposite of that would be heterotrophic. That's the organisms in kingdom Animalia. Do not make their own food inside of their bodies, but they have to consume it from somewhere else. So plants are autotrophic, meaning they make their own food. Also, their cells are different in that they have cell walls and organelles called chloroplasts, which we know this is really important for this. In fact, it's necessary. And then last characteristic, they do not move on their own. We did talk about how sometimes plants can tend to lean towards the source of light, whatever that may be, and kind of start to face the window or kind of, it almost looks like they're leaning or stretching out in the direction of the sun. And that can happen over time. Sunflowers even will, at the beginning of the day, the sunflower part, like the flower part of it, the disc, will face the sun in the morning, and then it actually tracks with the sky and follows it even as it sets later in the day. But outside from those few minor changes in their position, they do not voluntarily move on their own, right? That would be a little bit weird to see trees getting up and walking around on their roots. That would be a little bit interesting. So that's the last characteristic. They do not move on their own. Again, if you're doing the handwritten notes, here's where we are. You have your topic down here, plant classification. Plants are classified as follows. We mentioned that the domain is eukaryote. That's what's written over here, which means that it has nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Next, we went into talking about the kingdom that they are in. Okay, the kingdom is Plantae or plant. This is the Latin version, Plantae. Plant obviously is the English version. And then we went ahead and reviewed again the characteristics of that kingdom. All organisms in this kingdom are multicellular. They get energy by making their own food, which we said was autotrophic. They have cell walls and chloroplasts, and they do not move on their own. Now, here's where we get into the new stuff. Okay, back in October, you guys could have told me all that. Now we're going to get into, okay, so we're in domain, oh, not D, hold on. We're in domain Eukarya. Okay, kingdom Plantae. Now, once we get down past kingdom, we get into the different phyla of the plant kingdom. And there are two main phyla, just like in kingdom Animalia, how we had vertebrates and invertebrate were the different phyla sections for Animalia. For Plantae, the two phyla are, ooh, I don't want to grab the wrong one. Okay, there it is. Sorry. Are vascular and non-vascular. Now, I think I mentioned this in the vocab, but I want to say it again. Whenever you see this word vascular, it literally means something like tube-like or something made of tubes or some kind of tube shape. For us, when we see the word vascular in talking about plants, so whether it's vascular or non-vascular, I want you to think of the word veins. Okay, so V for vascular, V for veins. Okay, and the key is this: vascular plants do have veins, while non-vascular plants are non-veins, meaning they do not have veins. Okay, we'll talk more about that again tomorrow and as we go on and further into the unit, but the big thing you need to know is this: vascular plants have veins and structures that actually transport water from the roots up to the rest of the plant. Non-vascular plants do not have those tubes. So non-vascular plants tend to grow much, much, much shorter and close to the ground. Think like moss, the liverworts and hornworts as well. While vascular plants, because they have those tubes to transport water, those plants can grow up taller, like a tree or a bush or a flower of some sort. Okay? So, domain Eukarya, kingdom Plantae, and then here's where we start the new stuff with the two phyla, vascular and non-vascular. What determines whether or not they go into the vascular or non-vascular phyla has to do with how they reproduce. They reproduce sexually through seeds, or asexually or non-sexually through spores, which spores actually kind of, well, or kind of like cloning itself. Runners is one. Other types, we'll talk about those later. But how they reproduce, and then how they transport water, whether they have those tubes to transport or not. The big deal, vascular plants transport water and reproduce differently from non-vascular plants. The first thing you look at to figure out whether a plant is vascular or non-vascular is, does it have veins? Second thing you look at is how they reproduce. Do they produce a seed inside of a flower? Do they produce a pine cone of some sort? Do they produce spores like with moss? Okay, so any of those those will help determine later on which classes and groups they belong to. But for now, vascular or non-vascular is the two things I want you to understand. So in the handwritten notes, I actually made a little notation here. I said new stuff in a different color because everything above this is pretty much review. You should know this by now, unless you're new or you came in partway through the year or something. But after here, this is where all the new stuff comes in. So so we went through domain, kingdom, now we're in phylum. There are two phyla for plants, vascular and non-vascular, and they're classified into one of these phyla based on how they transport water and how they reproduce. Okay, and this is just kind of restating the same thing. Vascular plants reproduce and transport water differently from non-vascular plants. So this is just kind of a graphic to show you. This is the big idea of the plant kingdom, which can be divided into two phyla groups, vascular and non-vascular. Now, tomorrow we'll talk about the different classes or different subgroups of vascular, okay, how this further divides, and we'll talk about the other divisions of non-vascular as well. But for now, these are the two main groups. So make sure you have these written in your notes, either in the printed off version or handwritten, and then come back tomorrow for part 2.